Hi everyone, this week we're going to go over typical and atypical language development and also communicative competence. Before we get started, let's go over our objectives. So the first one is to determine the factors that are necessary to consider when considering if an English language learner has special needs, also being able to differentiate language acquisition from learning disability, identifying the normal language processes of ELLs, also recognizing the key legal rights around ELLs and special education, addressing all of the phases towards special education referral, listing the considerations that a team would have to think about when making a referral or thinking about making a referral, and also recognizing social and non-linguistic explanations of underachievement in bilinguals, which may be mistaken for examples of requiring special needs. Okay, so what's normal and what's not? In one common scenario, a child is referred for speech language testing because she is struggling academically. In her teacher's view, she is not learning English with the expected speed, and her academic skills are lagging behind those of her monolingual English-speaking classmates. The question that we're really bartering with today is, does the student have a language learning disability, or is she merely manifesting the normal processes of acquiring a second language? And the reason that we are talking about this topic in this class is because many times there are a lot of misunderstandings around the normal developmental process for English language learners, and the difference between sort of just language learning and special education needs. Okay, so the overrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse children in special education, as well as the quality of their educational experiences, has been regarded as among the most significant issues faced by the U.S. public school system in the past 30 years. So over the last 10 years, what we've seen is that the number of ELLs has increased 61%. Then, when we compare that number to the number of ELL students in special education, we see that that number is 110%. So what that shows us is that the increase in the number of ELL students in special education is actually more than the number of ELL students that have come into the education system. And what this tells us is that there have been some compliance concerns regarding ways in which English language learners have been referred into special education. And here are some of the consistent compliance failures. First is the failure to address language barriers when referring ELLs. Also, referrals did not take account of English language learners' language and culture. The placement decisions were based on their language proficiency, which was unfair since they are still learning English. And also, there was not a lot of communication with parents about the whole process of referral and placement into the program, also what it would entail to be in that program. So this is a huge problem because there may be many English language students who are being hindered from reaching their full academic potential because they have been placed in an inappropriate program with services that won't really cater to their language development or their language learning efforts. There are also ELLs who have been inappropriately placed into special education programs who are using up the precious resources that could be allocated to children in actual need of these special education services. And again, another reason why we're talking about this today is because the process of special education referral and placement starts with the classroom teacher, which is you. So you as teachers, it's very important for you to be able to recognize the difference and understand all of the aspects that you have to think about when attempting to make that referral. So there are those that are against the argument, and this is sort of the mind frame, the mindset that they have. They say, if English language learners are failing in general education, there is no harm in placing them in special education where they will receive individualized instruction. So if I were to ask you, why is this statement problematic? I'm sure many of you might have different answers to that. one fact that we do know is that English language learners in special education demonstrate lower verbal and full-scale IQ scores. The reason why would be because English language learners are around peers who may not have developed their language skills as far as typically developing students. They also may have some difficulties academically, cognitively, and in other aspects, which sort of may hold back English language learners because those are the peers that they're interacting with and learning from during the day. Also, ELLs do not receive the type of instruction that they need in these programs. Again, if you ask yourself why, think about these special instructional techniques and procedures that teachers of special education programs use. These techniques are very different than those that would be needed by English language learners. The children and students in the special education program have a wide range of needs, and each person can be very different in terms of needs with regards to cognition versus with language. Okay, so let's go over some of the normal processes and phenomena related to bilingualism. And again, remember, we're going over this so that you can distinguish and acknowledge some of these aspects as a teacher when considering referring an ELL student. So the first normal process and phenomena is transfer from the first language to English. This is something that we talked about a lot last week when we went over language acquisition. And we know that children manifest transfer from the first language to the second language because some of the grammatical rules may actually be very similar or may support the rules that children are learning in English. We know that this is a normal phenomenon. This is a sign of application of rules, or maybe a sign of language difference if there's an error that is made, and not because there's a disorder in place or that the child is confused in any way. The silent period is also something that we learned about last week, and as you remember, in that silent period, all English language learners are going to go through it, especially if they're very new to English. And during that period, they're going to be actively listening and trying to comprehend the sounds, the language around them. Remember that the younger the child, the longer the silent period. And that period can take anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more. Okay, the next normal process and phenomena is code switching. And many children who are English language learners also engage in a behavior known as code switching, and it involves changing languages or the phrases or sentences. So, for example, a Spanish speaker might say, "Me gustaría manejar," I'll take the car, right? Something like, "I'd like to drive," I'll take the car. Or a Filipino speaker might say, "With my teacher, I have," and then you can see that the rest of the example there is spoken by that first language of the Filipino speaker. Again, this is a normal phenomenon engaged in by many fluent bilingual speakers worldwide, and it's something that they do with others who they know will understand them and who speak those two same languages. Language loss is also something that is a natural phenomenon of English language learners. As they learn English, they lose skills and fluency in their first language if that first language is not being reinforced and maintained. This is also called subtractive bilingualism, because if you think about it, you are replacing one language with another rather than keeping that first language and adding on that second language. This subtractive bilingualism can be cognitively and linguistically very detrimental to children's learning and also to their families' lives, especially if they use that first language to communicate with their family or sort of to keep that bond ethnically or for their heritage or as a way to stay close to their family. Ideally, children should experience additive bilingualism, where they learn English while their first language and culture are being maintained and reinforced. So this is something you as teachers have a role to do with English language learners, is to really enforce or encourage parents or caretakers at home to continue using the first language of its students, and to help them maintain and build upon that knowledge. All of that knowledge, remember, is going to help them build a better foundation in English and give them a more solid foundation with which to build upon. Okay, so there are three categories of English language learners who will experience academic difficulty. Only the third group that I'm going to introduce you to today is the group that should be considered further for special education referral. Okay, so the first group would be those with deficiencies in their learning and teaching environment. Especially if in the teaching environment they are not being given the correct resources for English language learning development. Maybe the teacher doesn't differentiate his or her instruction in the classroom. Perhaps there's no assistant to help the English language learner, or that student is not being taken out of the classroom for additional English teaching. In other words, there isn't enough support in the classroom to help that child develop English. So that might be one reason why an English language learner is experiencing academic difficulty, and which would take away sort of any reasons why you should be thinking about special education as an answer or as a possible avenue. The second group of English language learners are those experiencing academic difficulties not related to a learning disability, related to something else, right? So it could be the fact that their schooling was interrupted in the past, that they've had limited formal education, and that they're getting used to the experience of schooling. They may have medical problems which might be getting in the way of their ability to learn and to focus in school. Low attendance because of family issues, or perhaps because they're moving around. And also high transiency, which means moving from school to school, and really not having a stable educational atmosphere in which to learn. So remember, the first thing that you should think about when considering if an English language learner does have a special need beyond just language learning, you should be looking at the environment in your classroom and if it's supportive enough for the English language learner. And the second thing you should be doing is investigating that child's family life and home life to see if any of those reasons listed there might be coming into play and affecting that student's ability to do well in school and to learn English. That third group would be the true ELLs in need of special education. Okay, and even then, when they're in need of special education, there are still many things that need to be considered in that process, and that's what we'll go through next.